As of now, we understand on how to create beans using Spring Framework. As a next step, we need to understand how to establish the dependencies between the beans that we create. At the starting of this section, we discussed about two important concepts with the name IOC and dependency injection. IOC means inversion of control. To implement these concepts inside an web application, first, we need to make sure we are creating the beans with the help of Spring Framework, which we completed so far. As a next step, we should also understand how to establish the dependencies between the beans so that we can tell to the Spring Framework to take care of these dependencies as well by using the concept of dependency injection. At runtime, Spring Framework is going to look for the dependencies. All the required dependencies will be automatically injected into a bean by using dependency injection. Before we try to discuss about how to establish the dependency between the beans, first we need to understand why can't beans survive independently? Why do they need dependencies? As you can see here, I have a flow. Usually inside any backend application, there'll be a controller layer followed by service layer and repository layer. It is not recommended to write all our business logic in a single file. It is not possible also because in real projects, your business logic may have thousands of lines, and putting all these thousands of lines in a single file is not recommended. That's why all the developers, what they're going to do is they're going to separate their business logic into multiple layers like controller layer, service layer, and repository layer. Let's imagine I have created a bean of controller and service and repository with the help of the stereotype annotations. When a request comes from a client application like browser or a mobile application, my controller bean, which is vehicle controller bean, it is going to accept the request. It is going to perform some basic validations on the request. Once it feels the request is proper, it needs to hand over the request to the next layer, which is the service layer. Inside the service layer, I have a bean created with the name vehicle service bean. Unless there is no dependency established between these two beans, my controller bean will never know to which service bean it has to forward the request. The same applies for the service bean as well. If service bean, if it wants to forward the request to the repository bean to save the data into the database or to read the data from the database, it has to forward the request. Unless we define the dependencies between these two beans, the forwarding of the request to the other layers is not going to be possible. As you can see on the left-hand side, I have a Spring context defined without establishing any dependency between the beans. And with that, what is going to happen? All my bean objects, they are going to be hanging inside the Spring context without knowing about each other, and I can't execute my business logic as well completely. Whereas if I establish that dependency between them, and if Spring is going to take care of dependency injection, this is how the Spring context is going to look like. The controller bean, it is going to be dependent on the service bean, and the service bean, it is going to be dependent on the repository bean. The process of connecting these dependent beans within the Spring IOC container is called as bean wiring. We are trying to wire all the dependent beans. That's why this name came, which is bean wiring. The wiring can be done manually by the developers, or they can also give this responsibility of wiring to the Spring Framework as well. If Spring is going to take care of the wiring, then it is going to be called as auto wiring, because wiring is going to happen automatically based upon the inputs provided by the developer. Whereas with the manual wiring, the developer has to write some good amount of code compared to the auto wiring scenario. I hope you're clear what is bean wiring and what is auto wiring and why we should establish the wiring or the dependency between multiple beans. In the next lecture, first we can try to explore on how to perform the manual wiring. Once we are clear about the manual wiring, we can move on to the concept of auto wiring in the upcoming lectures.